Welcome back to the Game Dev Show. My name is Luke Greenaway, and this week I am joined by RTS great Quinn Duffy. Quinn's experience includes being the design director on Age of Empires, but it goes all the way back 24 years of RTS triumphs, I'd like to say, including Homeworld, which obviously broke barriers in terms of 3D RTS, Company of Heroes, which changed the way we experience RTS entirely, even to like games working with Warhammer 40k license on products like Space Marine. Quinn, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Luke. Yeah, nice break over the holidays and ready for 2022.
Yeah. It's got to be better than 2021, right? I mean,
I hope so. I'm knocking wood right now. I don't know if you can hear that.
That's it. Did you do anything over the holiday season?
I had a to-do list and I got through a lot of that, which was great. Moving offices, and I had to install a new hot water tank, which was a lot of fun. There was, things to get through that was domestic related. So I actually spent a fair amount of time playing games. I've had a few weeks to kind of settle into the Steam backlog and get through some games.
Nice. Anything in particular?
I've been part of this in the Interactive Academy of Arts and Sciences kind of strategy panel for the last several years, and so we kind of break a long list of strategy and simulation games down into a short list for consideration for the DICE Awards. And so it's a lot of strategy and simulation, and it's a weird group because in some years we've had games like Age of Empires 4, and in other years we've had these crazy Russian mud driving games, like Spin Tires and games like that. So it's a strangely broad category. Flight Simulator on one hand, and this year I think one of my favorites was Inscription. That's sort of ostensibly kind of a card battler to begin with, and then it just all done I think by one guy or a very, very small team.
Oh wow. Fascinating
games. A lot of like kind of card battler, interesting context card battler games, Griftlands and Gloomhaven. It's been an interesting year. So I spent a fair amount of time on those, and it's great to have a list of games that you are almost obligated to play through. Not like it's a job, but you see things that maybe you wouldn't have normally seen. So spend a lot of hours.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, Gloomhaven's fantastic. I've played the board game a lot, and it's mad, isn't it? Now when you think about strategy, how broad the term strategy is. It's a bit like with RPGs, right? Like there are RPGs and strategies, both of them are so extensive now. There are strategic and role-playing elements in almost 80% of games, you could say. But yeah, I must admit, I need to get back to my Steam backlog. I feel like my Steam backlog probably feels like how Harry Potter feels when he's younger and he's like locked underneath the stairs in that little cupboard. Like, it's like I see it every now and then, but I never really get around to treat them fairly.
Yeah, and it just keeps getting bigger. So the games that have been in there a long time, they're like getting pressed into oil at this point. They've been down there so long in the list that stuff just keeps piling up on top of them, and it's a dauntless task to consider getting back to games I bought several years ago and never got around to playing much.
It's mad, isn't it? With yourself and with games, and obviously now, like spending time going through your back catalogue. Is games something you've always been into? What were you like growing up? Were you a gamer?
I think in some ways I kind of, you predate gaming just a little bit. I'm going to be 49 this year. Yeah, I had to sort of think about it. 2022, do some math. I think you think of people like in their mid-30s have grown up with gaming consoles and, multiple gaming platforms. It's just ubiquitous. It's just been part of their background since they were really little kids. And we didn't have that. So my kind of first experience with computer gaming goes back to sort of Pong era. I think my grandparents went to some like condo pre-sale meeting, where you could go win a prize, and they got some knockoff Pong. It only did Pong, this sort of Pong console, and my uncles at the time just like hoarded it for about 24 hours. Barely let any of the nieces and nephews play it, and then the thing broke. And so there's a lot of like unrequited desire to play these games, and we never got a chance to. And I think early, like arcades, right? I think my first arcade experience, I actually lived in Belfast as a kid, seeing, Pac-Man and Galaga and things at arcades or, corner stores. But I think most of the gaming I did up until, into my mid-teens was tabletop and paper, Dungeons and Dragons and Rollmaster and Warhammer and those kinds of things. And then, at some point we got an Amiga and I started playing more games and fiddling around with things a little bit. And that's kind of where it started for me anyway.
It's crazy how many people we have on who were there during the inception of video games, during its like the Amiga days, and how many of them spent their teens and their childhood playing D&D, right? And playing Warhammer and, throwing dice, right? Like it's crazy and how that's evolved over time, but it's D&D is still there. Like you've still got, I think it's 5E's there at the moment, like Raw Edition. And I love how D&D is just this constant, it's growing now and it's mad.
I think it might be more popular than ever.
Yeah.
Keep of the Borderlands or whatever, that starter set that so many people of my age got. I think just sort of a whole new generation has unironically discovered it.
Yeah. It's mad. I think it's great how it's digitalized now as well, because you've got like third-party platforms like Roll20, which allow you to like visualize a full D&D campaign, but across the world, right? So like everyone tunes in. Like I did it last year during COVID with a friend who was a GM in the States. And it was great because you had people like, there's a group of us logging in from Europe, and he was like going through everything with us in the States. And it's great that people have still found a way during like COVID, during isolation and stuff, to play D&D of all things.
It's remarkably adaptable. I mean, apart from maybe playing online, the kind of cost of entry is cheap.
Yeah, so good.
Paper and a pencil and a couple of dice. If you're not buying tons of rule books and stuff, but it's kind of democratizes play and involvement, and you don't have to have a $700 console or $3,000 rig to enjoy that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same experience you get in a lot of games. That kind of it can be cooperative. You're playing with friends. It's creative, engaging. It's problem solving. It's all the things that games deliver so well.
It's so true, and I think it's very rememberable. Right, like you just remember. Like I remember like my first D&D campaign. I remember all the normally it's all the things that go wrong unexpectedly.
Amazing narratives emerge out of these game experiences. Yeah, so it's great. We had a long, probably my mid to late teens to maybe my very early 20s, this long running campaign, and this is going to be super nerdy. But we were using the Rollmaster rule set, but playing in the Warhammer fantasy world, which was, we just love the grit and this kind of like almost pseudo historical aspect of it.
Yeah.
And we just played for years and years and years, and we start at 8:00 on a Friday and finish at 3 or 4 in the morning. And Rollmaster is very involving. You get like one battle would take like 4 or 5 hours to resolve. It was very detailed, rule set. We didn't get as far as you might think in that however many years we were playing. So
that's so hardcore. I can imagine you as a man of Sigmar. Were you like, what did you roll? What was your class? Your go-to class?
I was in Rollmaster. I played kind of like a barbarian, Declan McPhee of the Clan McPhee.
That's brilliant. Okay, so let's talk about your uni days then, because obviously they sound very productive. Like, what did you?
They were not productive.
What did you study at uni?
Yeah, I did geography. Was moving into a mix of kind of geography and urban planning. I spent 6 years at University of Calgary, but did not graduate. So partway through there, towards maybe my 4th or 5th year, I actually got married, and then I started work at a game company in Calgary called Virtual Games, and working as a writer. A friend of mine was on contract writing and doing game manuals and text description and those kinds of things, and he needed some help, and so I subcontracted to his subcontract, and that turned into a job and evolved into, looking back, what seemed like some game design aspects. We were starting to work on rules, we were starting to work on narrative, and this was for a multi-person online virtual environment. The first round of VR was starting. And so the parent company wanted to do online virtual collaborative engineering. And so they were building this technology to do it, this giant big hub with like 100 modems in it. and software to run it all. And then the internet happened, and it was like, oh, well, that was a dumb idea. They thought they could prove the technology by building games, and so they had a game division, and we started working on sort of almost like a Babylon 5-esque future space station.
Okay.
And it had the worst name ever. It's called Stim Slum. Kind of like cyberpunky Babylon 5. Augmented skins, and because we thought people could customize their characters and their weapons. It'd be a bit of an I think in many ways pretty forward thinking. It never really amounted to anything. We tried a few other little things, and I think ultimately the company became a bit of a tax dump. I started looking around, and I tried to start up my own company with a lot of people who were working there, and trying to get funding. And I just feel that we were like 6 months too early. We wanted to do gaming content for internet portals, like Yahoo and this kind of stuff. And I think people didn't quite understand that. I have a feeling if I'd gone to investors 6 months later, I'd be Mark Zuckerberg, and people would be complaining about my billions. Probably not. That probably wouldn't have happened. But yeah, that was kind of my first company was at this virtual games in Calgary, Alberta.
That's great though. Did you find it helped with because obviously later on you went to Relic, I guess, when you left, and I suppose that experience, even though short and ultimately doomed in some ways, like it sounds like it was pivotal because you actually were hired as a designer at Relic. Yeah. How did that come about?
It was kind of, I never really fully realized that I was actually applying for a job at Relic. My brother had been living in Vancouver, and he was selling motorcycles, and he was talking to Alex Garden, who was the founder of Relic, and he said that that I was in Calgary and I was working on games, and that I was going to go out and meet him, and that I should meet Alex and just talk shop kind of thing. And so I came out to Vancouver for a weekend and stopped in to see Relic, and I didn't see Homeworld, which they were working on at the time. But I chatted to a few folks, and I had a big portfolio, like a binder of paper designs and pitches and things that we'd been working on over the years. So I had a little bit of a portfolio. And then I got back to Calgary, Sunday night or whatever it was, and got an email from Aaron Daly, who was the lead designer on Homeworld, and said they wanted to hire me. So I sort of leaned out the office and yelled down the hall to my wife and said, "We're going to move to Vancouver."
How did she take it?
I think she was excited. At least I hope so. That was about almost 25 years ago. So it was, the industry was small. There weren't a lot of people at Relic. There weren't a lot of people who'd been working on games, and people with any kind of experience, I think, had some value to at least take a chance on.
Yeah. So, I remember Homeworld. I remember playing it on like a living room floor, years and years and years ago. And I'm pretty sure it was on like an old Pentium 2. Oh God, I can't even remember if it had a graphics card, but I remember there was like an old CRT monitor, and it was all set up on the floor, like keyboard on my lap, and you turn the monitor on it and make that sound like you were starting up an engine on the Enterprise or something. Like it was just ridiculous. But I remember how ridiculous it was that it was a game, but it was fully 3D. It just felt incredible, and also the emphasis on scale. Because obviously you had your mothership, but when you had your fighters like flying around, it really felt like it brought the epicness from, say, Star Wars, and like the fights you used to see, the combat you used to see in Star Wars. What was that like working on that as your first Relic project?
I mean, it's pretty amazing. I know that like the very first day I showed up for work at Relic, and like I said, I hadn't seen Homeworld at all, and I went into Alex Garden's office. And he kind of booted up the game, and it started on the mothership. And then he moved the camera. And it's just like, my jaw dropped. I got goosebumps. Like I'm getting goosebumps now, kind of recounting it. I just thought it was staggeringly beautiful. And, the soundscape, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. And, we didn't see anything like it, I think, for a few years after that either. Like I think the RTS continued in a pretty conventional way for a few years after that, but it was remarkable. I think a lot of people at Relic at the time, and there's still a lot of them around. I still work with a number of them. I don't think we knew enough to be scared of what we were trying, and we didn't know enough about tools and the things we needed to build a game schedules and professionalism and managers and all this kind of stuff. So some of it was brute force and just sheer creativity and some crazy late nights trying to get things done. So it was a remarkable experience. Like to have that be your first game, I think is set a bar. That's a tough bar too.
Yeah, but it's a staple as well of the RTS. You look at I'm going to talk about this a bit later about RTS games that are at really the genuine innovators, innovative titles. Actually, take away the RTS tag, but actually innovative titles and titles that push boundaries within that genre, but then are applied across all genres of gaming. And Homeworld was definitely that, because it said you can do space, you can do 3D, and you can do scale. But you touched on it then. You said obviously that set the bar so high, but during your career at Relic, you also obviously worked on Company of Heroes 1 and 2, and I think 2 you're the design director, the game director, sorry. And they again, they completely different. Tell us about those as projects, because they're entirely different from Homeworld as RTSs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are. I think the roots of Relic were around, around presentation, around innovation, sort of pushing boundaries. I think Homeworld kind of set the DNA of Relic and the types of games that we wanted to do. I think in terms of interesting systems, of maybe de-abstracting game rules a little bit and making a more experiential product, which some people love and some people don't. Some people want their RTSs to be predictable and very numbers based. And we didn't think that Company of Heroes, for instance, was that kind of experience. That the source material, it wasn't about doing, 4 DPS exactly. It wasn't about these extremely codified rules. We wanted some dynamic play. We wanted to try and deliver a bit of a story of World War II and match some of the source material, not just fiction like Saving Private Ryan or Band of Brothers, but nonfiction, documentary footage and real life stuff. I was always really inspired by real stories. I think the lineage is there. They are very, very different games, but that Relic DNA of innovation and experience and kinetic effects and amazing audio and those are I think we brought more of that to RTS than maybe any other company. But it was a love or hate for a lot of people, right? Some people wanted more of a StarCraft experience, and some people wanted something a little more dynamic. Rules were a little more flexible and outcomes weren't always predictable to the level of a single battle. We wanted predictability kind of over time, a little more like this unit will generally beat this unit most of the time. Over 10 games, you can expect that Rangers were better than Volk Grenadiers.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, an errant grenade, or you get, something can happen. That's kind of the experience of war.
I love that though, that design ethos, because I love this. This has come up a few times, especially this season, but the unpredictability of games is what makes them so good. We spoke about D&D at the beginning. What makes D&D, in my opinion, so enthralling is adapting as a team to a situation that you just hadn't planned for. The source sort of blows up. So something just goes wrong. I've been in a game before where a wizard's rolled a 1 when they're trying to open a door and they've broken their hand, and that's it. And you have to adapt. I love that. Look, this should happen 9 times out of 10. The things that inspire the games that you've designed and worked on, they're not absolutes, right? It's not, war isn't an absolute what's going to be the outcome, because there are so many variables. How did development itself change from Homeworld all the way up to Company Heroes? Because that's a long time in the industry. And how did your approach to development change?
If we look at the sort of development side, building games, and I think I touched on it before, sort of half jokingly, but it became more professional. People got a little more specialized, and we realized that you needed people to take over tasks that, in a lot of ways, designers and programmers and other people would do, and that would take them away from developing the game and working on creative aspects. So we started to see more producers and QA people and QA leadership and tools programmers and people who were critical to helping the dev team build a game. We often put the sort of the creative aspects of the game, the designers and artists and sound designers and stuff, they often get prominent billing in the experience, but the people that actually help make the games, that actually, give us the means to build games, are absolutely critical. And they're the unsung heroes. They're the people that, can save you an hour a day in your loading up your editor, because the editor takes 10 minutes to load. Somebody can optimize that and get it down to 30 seconds, and like all of a sudden that has a massive impact on your day and your experience and how quickly you can iterate testing in the game. And we often maybe lose sight of that. I love to draw in military analogies because I was always very interested in military history. And, you think of an army, there are very, very few frontline soldiers in any army. It's a tiny percentage of the overall size of the army. Everybody else it's the logistics, right? It's engineers building bridges, and it's people delivering ammunition and fuel and all the things that an army needs, and it's medical people. And it's like, that's the army. What do they say? Like, amateurs talk tactics and professionals talk logistics. It's the logisticians, and it's the people who help you get into combat, so to speak, who make things work.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a really cool analogy as well. Have you always been into history? Has that always been like an inspiration for you, or is it something that's naturally evolved over time?
Always. I think I was 5 or 6, and I had to get my tonsils out. And I wanted my parents to go to the little local library in this little town we were living in Ontario, to get out this book on World War II. And it was kind of a picture book. But I wanted that book when I was going to spend 2 or 3 days in hospital after getting my tonsils out. So yeah, I was, I don't know, 5 or 6. And this hand-drawn picture book, and it had Sherman tanks and other things in it. I don't remember the exact, it was World War II and Normandy and all that kind of stuff. And I remember watching The World at War on PBS when I was a kid, or I was probably Ontario Public Broadcasting, wherever it was, and just always being interested in military history, right the way through, as long as I can remember. It's I find the study of military history and warfare kind of encapsulating a lot of society, a lot of the the challenges we face, a lot of our character as people. There's this innovation and brutality and heroism, and it just, for me, encapsulates so much interesting material, and so I reference a lot of it either directly or tangentially in game designs, in presentations, and those kinds of things. So it's it's a very interesting area of study. I think in a different life I might have gone into a more of a historical vein at university, for instance. But
yeah, because I was going to say, because obviously with geography, well, it's not history. How have you been able to apply what you learned at uni at all?
Well, every once in a while, I think like when we were doing when we were doing Impossible Creatures, it was it's like I know what biomes are. I know what tundra is.
It is a stretch, isn't it?
It is a bit of a stretch. I found that like geography is very versatile because it branches between science and culture and sociology. You can do kind of physical geography, and you can do human geography. And I started to be very interested in city design and urban design as part of that. There is an element of sociology and understanding culture and understanding how to research and draw inference. And, I think actually, a lot of university teaches you these skills, sort of soft skills around, I guess, kind of being creative within a context. So I think it teaches a lot of that, and you do sciencey stuff and you do culturally stuff. And so I found like it was very versatile, and I was enjoying it. And also my dad did it, and I didn't know what else to do.
Oh, nice.
So ultimately, I'm like, I'll do geography. We'll figure it out later.
That's literally what happened as well.
That's a big part of it. Yeah. I probably had that literal conversation somewhere with myself.
Oh, that's great. Going back a tiny bit, I just wanted to touch on, because obviously we talked about how like game development evolved during your time between working on Homeworld and then obviously up to Company Heroes 2. Obviously the industry it's just continued to scale up, and like projects have become increasingly big. And also you talk about logistics, and that obviously it's such a fantastic analogy because you can apply that to game development so heavily with like obviously like you said. But it does, I guess, in some ways, like you see the indie scene really keeping alive that early noughties like approach to game design, playing like, I've got a great idea, I'm going to create a game based on that idea, and that's it. Like, you know, like you get a team of 3 people, just crack on. Do you prefer it now, or do you prefer it back then, like in the early noughties when you were starting out?
I love that early noughties. So many ways you can take that. Yeah, there are a lot more considerations these days. There are a lot more kind of constituents involved in game development. There are a lot more questions to answer, and you deal with geopol and making sure that, you know, you're, especially for us with, you know, things like historical games over the years at Relic, that you're trying to be sensitive to source material and these kinds of things. The games get very, very big because expectations are enormous around, you know, when people spend 60 or 70 or $80 for a game, expectations are pretty significant that there's a lot of content, that they're getting their money's worth. And so you know, you're adding a lot of product, you're dealing with a lot of different game player and, you know, sort of developer constituents. You've got really big publishers that have lots of departments, and demands are coming in fast and furious from all angles. And especially, you know, if you're doing a game that's big internationally, you've got all of the sort of marketing and PR needs from around the world, and they all differ. It's a constant barrage of activity and needs and demands. I think for a big game and modern gaming, and I think you can lose a little bit of sight of the game. You have to be constantly reminded that, hey, we're building a game here, and this is ultimately for the players, and we've decided that, you know, who the audience really is. We have to kind of keep going back to that on occasion, because it's so easy to get fractured and diluted and spread thin when doing a really big game. You know, teams get bigger, and you know, you get over a theoretical best maximum size, like say 80, 90, 100 people. That's about the biggest kind of group that you can manage with any kind of consistency and regularity. And big game teams get substantially bigger than that, so it gets harder. And you need, you know, it's not like you need one producer for every 10 people over 100. You need like 2 or 3, right? It doesn't scale in a linear way. So the teams get bigger, overhead gets bigger, demands are huge. You know, it can be challenging and frustrating. It can be amazingly rewarding. It's fantastic to see a game get a huge reach. But sometimes I envy, you know, a team of 3 or 4 people who can get down to a crystalline, super clear, super creative idea, and they're self-constrained because they don't have a ton of resources. There's only so much they can do, and you get this laser focus on something really, really crisp and cool. I love what they're able to do.
Yeah.
And not to say that I could do that anymore. I sort of wonder, you know, with years of doing big games, like I would, there's so much muscle memory around scale and team size and expectation. You sort of, you know, you wonder, could I go back and do a 3 or 4 person game? It might be tough.
Yeah. Personally, I think it's like so accurate what you said in terms of, you know, when the team gets too big, there is a conflict of ideas, expectation, and conceptualization. And like, I think it becomes harder and harder to even execute the things you do agree on, because people want to execute them in different ways. And obviously, the bigger you are, the more money becomes a bigger part of that conversation as well. Obviously, like budgets, everyone has a budget. And I think actually you're starting to see games that are proving to be successful are exactly like you said, where they are created from the ground up with that design approach that it's for a specific audience, and then hopefully larger audiences adopt it.
Yeah, it is very hard. I think if you're like, you can be super, super niche and do something amazing, and you won't hit a big audience. But there are cases of people doing something that seems super niche and hitting this huge audience, like really just triggering something that everybody loved, or something that everybody could see. You know, there's something that they could grasp onto. And you see it in books, and you see it in movies and other things that, you know, they become cult classics. They become favorites. They might not make the kind of Spider-Man No Way Home kind of money or whatever,
Yeah.
but they attract a broad audience and a much bigger audience than you first might think. And I think there's focus grouping and other things. It can only tell you so much, and sometimes things build a momentum on their own that seems to come out of nowhere, and these games just become huge for whatever reason. They build momentum, and people just jump on and love what they see. I think of like, say, early MOBAs. I remember playing like World of Tanks the very, very like years and years and years ago, and I'm like, I don't know about, and then I don't know, whatever. A year later, it's just like there's 8 million players or something. Like, what did I miss? Was there something I missed about it? I don't know.
This is why it's hard to do with bigger teams, because like it's easy to have an idea and then add features later, but keep to the core of that idea. Sometimes your features become the core of the game. And I think that's where and that's why MOBAs were so good, because actually the idea of MOBA is so simple, and it was for a very specific group. It's a Warcraft 3 mod. Like, it's crazy how that's obviously become this all-encompassing genre. And obviously Riot and Tencent, they've done a fantastic job of capitalizing on the popularity of League of Legends. Now, you've got, is it Arcana, like the TV series? It's got its own card game, but they're executing those ideas very, very well. They're like, this is a card game for people who like card games, but also it's contextualized within the League of Legends universe, and so hopefully we're going to attract people who like League of Legends. Like, that's their scalability, if you like. You worked on, you were one of the principal designer on Space Marine, right? Mm-hmm. And it's mad, and I don't want to obviously offend anyone, but I don't think it's a stretch to say that Space Marine is arguably the most successful action game. Yeah, what was it like? Because obviously you were a Warhammer fan growing up. Like, what was it like working on that?
It's pretty intense. It was a very interesting road to Space Marine, because that game and the team that was working on it went through 3 or 4 lives. Initially, there was a very different experience being kind of pitched to THQ, and then we had a license for a while, and so we were building towards a licensed game. We were trying to figure out which sort of tools and engines to use, and we were looking kind of at some in-house stuff. So it was the Darksiders engine and the Saints Row engine, to see what we wanted to build with in terms of the experience. Engineers hated the Saints Row engine. Designers loved it because it was so data-driven, and you could do anything in that game. This was all before Space Marine. And we were working on this license game, and the license was very, very expensive. And when THQ had a change in management, they came in and said, "How much is this license?" Okay, we're not doing that. It was from one day to the next. We went from a license to Space Marine to 40K game. It was really crazy because the team just sort of went poof. They scattered all over not to other companies, like just to different ideas, and started building things. And we had things up and running in within a couple of days. Some melee combat and a Space Marine character running around. It was all very sort of free form, and it took weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks to kind of rein everybody back in, to try and settle on on an idea and what we wanted to do. And we weren't great at that stuff. We weren't great at the tech. We weren't great at the genre. We knew the source material, and I think that was the one pillar we could always rely on. But it took a long time. We had to hire people to build a console team, and it took a very, very long time to get to the kernel of that game, which is just that amazing switch from melee to range to and pack, just how fluid that experience was. We always wanted that kinetic weight and the energy, and to present Space Marines closer to what they are in the fiction, where one Space Marine, kind of wakes up, kills 1,000 orcs before breakfast. And that's just like there's no sense of scale of how powerful these characters are.
Yeah.
So we wanted to try and get a little bit of that. And so it was very, very different.
Is it hard? Going from RTS to because it's a complete they're so far detached from one another.
Yeah. Everything was hard. I think the only things that we could rely on were those, like I said, the source material and some of Relic's background. That ethos that I talked about, that sort of presentation and kinetics and strength and sort of system design and innovation. But everything was hard on that game. And ultimately, I think I was maybe a year or so from the end. We wanted to start Company Heroes 2. Relic went through a tragedy. We had one of our design leads was killed in a car accident, and so I think everybody was foundering a little bit and emotionally wrecked by that experience. And I think that I needed a change, and so I moved back to the Company Heroes franchise, and we started Company Heroes 2 around that time. So that was one of those kind of defining moments at Relic where I think a lot of things in the studio changed. A lot of what we understood about our people and how to take care of people and a legacy and these kinds of things.
Yeah.
It was a tough start on Company Heroes 2, and a lot of the team was still building Space Marine, but that for me was a good fit.
Yeah. That sounds so tough. Like, I think you forget about these things happening. I guess from the outside, like, you forget that these things happen, and you forget that even with scale of teams growing, communication is often so close, and you do become like, I know it's such a cliche, but you do become like an ever extending family. So it's tough when you hear like that obviously the emotional impact that then has and reverberates throughout the company. And I think from that experience, how did that like influence obviously going into Company of Heroes 2, not working on Space Marine, but also the entire development process?
Yeah, I think there was a desire, I think, to support Brian's legacy. He'd been on Company Heroes and on Coho, the Company Heroes Online that we'd worked on for a while. Deeply loved the franchise, so part of that was just to make sure we were doing justice to it and making sure that we were going to do another one. I think for that reason, we had to start really, really small and trying to spend some time figuring out what we wanted to do and which area, and to reconnecting with fans, because I hadn't been on the franchise for a few years. Sort of reconnecting with fans and kind of the state of the community in the game, and working on that sort of background research. And THQ a few years before that had wanted us to do Company Heroes on the console. We were examining whether there were some ideas that we could take from some of that, just to are there ways that we could simplify and streamline the RTS experience. But I think ultimately too many of those would have detracted from the Company Heroes-ness of it.
I mean, Company Hero, I've played a lot of Company Hero. I love Company Heroes. I think personally, this has definitely come up as well, like speaking to audio designers and audio directors, but the audio and the immersion in Company of Heroes ones, the audio, the barks, like it is without doubt, like you look at immersion and it's definitely like top two for me. And that's an RTS, you're not even third person, but like the impact of artillery, right? Like you got howitzers going off, like the feel of like having a tank that you've invested all your fuel in go over a landmine, you're like, brilliant. Like, there goes my tier 2. Do you know what I mean? Like, but then like that feeling of obviously then adapting to that situation and bunkering. This is why the RTSs are so brilliant, because there are so many things you're having to react to and be proactive at the same time. I was reading in PC Gamer, it was a quote, obviously, that was applied to Company of Heroes 3. It was like, it was yours. It was your ethos. It was like every battle tells a story. And it's really interesting. So I was speaking to a colleague a few days ago about you coming on. And he didn't know about that quote, but he was like, that's the brilliant thing with Company Heroes. Every time you fire it up, it's like, you're doing Skirm, you're doing multiplayer. Every game just feels a bit different. Like, it doesn't feel very repetitive. And I think that's a testament, obviously, to what the work the team have done. Have you been very involved in Company Heroes 3, or has most of your time been focused on, obviously, Age of Empires 4? Because you were design director on Age 4, and I can't imagine you've been able to do both.
No. What is it, Hollywood people say? I gave notes over the years. Either when asked or every once in a while, if there was a big build or a new feature that had come in, I would play and write up some notes and send it to the executive producer and so on. He could just, it's like, hey, use these as you want. These are my perspective, some as developer, some as player, some feedback on aspects of the game that I've seen or played. That's essentially the sum total of my involvement in Company Heroes 3. It's just occasional rounds of feedback. When Age of Empires started to ramp down, I was able to ramp up a little bit of my involvement, because, Age basically, from a development perspective, feature perspective, was kind of done, early summer. And we spent a number of months just on hardening, on, building the next couple of sort of balance patches, because there's a very rigorous process to go through when you're launching a game in terms of testing and certification. It's on multiple platforms, and, we need to make sure the game is absolutely as stable as possible so it doesn't crash and leave thousands and thousands of people on the lurch. But that was mostly engineering and production, dealing with final optimizations and hardening and bug fixing and those kinds of things. So I had a little more time in the day to spend on Company Heroes. So I was helping out with a few tangential areas of the game, and I was certainly playing it a fair amount, but it was never from a sort of an actual designer or game director on the process. So,
I mean, has that been hard to not be as involved, or was this, you knew this was going to be part of the decision, taking on the design director job with Age?
Oh yeah, no, it's it's always a little hard because I love the franchise, but I think if I can take one thing out of my time at Relic, I think it's helping to build a good team. The idea that several years ago, you have the hit by a bus problem. If certain people in your company are hit by a bus, is the company screwed? Like if you lose your general manager or one of your executive producers or whatever, or design director, can people step in? And I think over the last several years at Relic, the bench has gotten very deep, and there are people who, they might love the franchise more than I do. They might understand aspects of it more than I do. I've got maybe that legacy. I've got some of our historical decisions, but there are people who might understand the nuances of some of these systems far better than I do now. You'd love to work on it, but there are good people working on it. There are people that you've worked with, and some people you'd hired, and it's in good hands.
Yeah.
So I could focus on Age and not have to worry about anything else because there's good people working on these other games.
Yeah, tell us about this, because this is a complete leap the other way again within the RTS genre.
Yeah. That was that was a long development. We started talking to Microsoft 2015, the first discussions, and then into 2016. So it was a very long process of spinning up and building that. I think we knew that we had to be careful of our roots, because we're doing Microsoft's game and we're doing a game for a different audience. I mean, there's some overlap, but it really was a different audience. And so we had some reminders in our pillars. There's a Sun Tzu quote that a general has kind of won the battle before they ever start to fight. Something along those lines, right? That the nation, and this goes back to that logistics thing, that the nation is behind them, and that their army is supported, and that they're ready to fight. And it was just to remind ourselves that Age is a game that has a huge emphasis on economy and city building, and that's a part of the game that we didn't do in Company Heroes on purpose, because we wanted to focus on tactics. If we had added all of the tactics and the tactical play from Company Heroes on top of all of the economic meta and city building and tech tree of Age, it would have been utterly overwhelming. So we just had to keep reminding ourselves that the Age is a different experience, and we have to present all of the parts of the game. It's a big audience. People play it a lot of different ways. There's a lot of ways to win, a lot of ways to engage with the content. And, right from the beginning, that was kind of an important discussion point. Just that look, this isn't medieval Company Heroes. It's a different game and a different experience. We tried to work in a few things. We tried some very different changes early in development in terms of our, some of our economy and ideas around that. You pushed until things stopped feeling like Age, because it has a formula that people love, and we found those boundaries, and then pulled back. It's like, this doesn't feel like Age anymore. It's too Civ-like, or that's a kind of a tactical element that feels out of place. And so it was a long process. Microsoft is, because I worked with them on Impossible Creatures as well. As a company supporting developers, they have changed in huge ways in the intervening period of time. Everybody we deal with there has worked on games. They're all developers. They're gamers. My kind of counterpoint at Microsoft, Adam Eisgreen, had been at Westwood on the Red Alert titles, and so he understood RTSs and the challenges, and so we had great empathy, I think, for each other. And Impossible Creatures, I think our product manager had come from Access or Excel. He loved games, but he hadn't built them. And so I don't think he understood all of the challenges. But Microsoft, they were great to deal with. They were, like I said, they're empathetic, they're supportive, they were logical, they're sort of data informed. They do a lot of usability and other things that can provide some great insights. And I think just they were a great partner. So they helped us in a lot of ways to realize what H4 needed to be.
Yeah, I think. Did you think you've been successful in keeping the established fan base happy whilst also introducing new fans? From my perspective, as like a new player, like I thought you did a brilliant job. I thought it was fantastic, but I know that I'm easier to please, to be honest, because my expectations are like, I don't have like an established. It's like going to Company of Heroes 3. I'm going to expect the same level of immersion, the same variables, the same impact of combat as I got in Company of Heroes 2 and 1. If that's absent, then I will naturally be disappointed. Mm-hmm. Do you think you've managed to achieve like that holy grail of keeping an established fan base happy whilst growing to new people?
Yeah, I think so. Like from what I know of some of the numbers, on paper, it certainly looks like it. We knew that, certainly the last kind of couple of years of development, that the game was going to be on Game Pass. And we knew that was probably going to involve a different audience and people trying the game for the first time. You don't, like I said, you don't have to spend that $60 or $80 to buy the game. You can spend your $15 a month or on Game Pass and try it. And so it drove some decisions around usability, around that kind of the first experience, around including aspects like Art of War, not just to teach players how mechanically to play the game, but to teach them why and to give them an opportunity to build on certain core experiences that you need to play these RTS games. Like how to boom your economy. Like, what does that mean? And why would I do that? And how do I do that? And so I think there was a need and a desire to make the game a little more accessible in terms of how we teach it. We didn't want to dumb down some things. We made a number of changes to simplify and streamline and add some quality of life content, and there'll be a lot more of that coming. These games are, Relic's certainly got a history of supporting games years and years and years after ship. And the Age franchise, that's an expectation now, right? The fact that game just improves and improves and improves, and so that'll be happening. No, I think we've captured a lot of core. We certainly see, and I think it's allegorical. This part is allegorical, but the number of, say, competitive Age players and competitive players from Warcraft 3 and other titles that have come into Age and are streaming it on Twitch and playing it, and we're getting, you see tons of YouTube views and all these things. Seems to me an indication that there's some acceptance among the core. For Age. So I think that's really exciting. Yeah. And then aspects of the campaign, the putting in the historical documentary approach to make it maybe a little more accessible and to help teach a little bit. Age, there's all those memes about, I've got a history exam, I better play some Age. It's like, hey, we're gonna make that real. Like here, enjoy. So I loved how those turned out. That was such an amazing experience to be part of that historical stuff. So, but anyway, that draws in a slightly different audience. Maybe people who are, the history people. There's RTS game players. There's Age fans, and I think we're getting all of those. Yeah,
I totally agree. I think it's very interesting that you talk about, obviously, streamers picking it up and people coming over from games which arguably are more competitive. Because probably my favorite design decision, because you never see it with RTS, because it's impossible almost to balance, is launching with 8 asymmetrical teams. StarCraft, I single out StarCraft as probably like the biggest competitive RTS, if you like. Historically, it's competitive because it's incredibly easy to balance. You have 3 teams, but within those 3 teams, you have a lot of complexity. What you've done with Age is actually say, well, we're going to launch with 8 teams who have, again, an incredible depth and complexity, because they completely changed. Like I love Delhi, right? Like I like Delhi because I love the scholar system. I love that, just for people who haven't played Age of Empires 4, like if you play as the Delhi Sultanate, they essentially can build scholars who are these units who are your religious units. So they can capture points, but they can also improve your research if you put them in mosques, but they can also improve your production rate if you put them in like within military buildings. And so they're this incredibly flexible unit that no other faction out of the other 7 factions has access to. But it feels like it makes it so it's very accessible, because you could just leave them in the mask and improve your research rate and get better technology quicker. But actually the skill ceiling is extremely high, because you really want to be microing them around and get them to do several things to maximize the investment in them. Obviously, this is a really long question. Whose decision was to be like, you know what, we'll try and balance it later. Let's just launch with 8 teams and see how that lands.
I mean, that was an early thing. Yeah, I think initially, as part of our first pitch, we'd done something like 11 or 14 civs. I think at Age of Empires, the ensemble love to say that they did the research for Age of Empires 2 in the children's section of the library, because they wanted it accessible, like accurate but accessible. And we thought that, well, maybe people have progressed a little bit and we can be just a bit more sophisticated in some ways. And so we'll go to Wikipedia. We're not going to go to scholarly tomes and PhD papers, as valuable as those are. But we'll go to sort of Wikipedia and get that top line of a lot of this info and start there. And so when we started on Civs, it's like, hey, Google, top biggest medieval civilizations. And obviously Age 2 had a ton of them already, but it's like getting a world map with all these bubbles of overlapping civilizations. And maybe this is a bit where geography comes in, but seeing them in the spatial relationship and how they overlap, and where these big civilizations overlapped in the same period of time, that's where conflict happened, and that's where story emerges and all the other things. And so it was kind of that. We had 11 or 14, I can't remember the exact number, or maybe we started with 14 and pitched 11 and ended up at one point with only 7, and then got back up to 8. I think taking that approach, we wanted lots of civs because that's part of Age. Like you couldn't ship Age of Empires with 3 civs. That's not its thing, right? What does Age 2 have? Like 30, 31, 35? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's
a lot. So we wanted to make sure we shipped with enough, but we had a design pillar about kind of using history as a tool and authenticity as a tool to help us differentiate and make these civs a bit more culturally accurate. I know that's doing a lot of heavy lifting because it is a game. We wanted to reduce some of the overlap. Age of Empires is great because there is a lot of overlap between civs. Everybody's got kind of a spear dude and a slashy dude and an armored horseman, and there's archetypes that form that rock, paper, scissors, and you got to have that. And that's the core that we can always rely on. How much can we add around the civilization to make them unique, culturally and in terms of gameplay? And that's kind of where we invested a fair amount of our time in terms of research and additional art and the landmark system and all that kind of stuff, trying to make them, the Mongols feel more like Mongols and to make their historical advantages competitive advantages in the game experience. And same with Delhi. Like that was, one of our designers, Sean Easterday, I think developed that system, based on research. Scholarly pursuit and knowledge were really vital to these cultures. And so, okay, well, there's a thing to build a system around. So let's go with that.
And you actually feel that. I think that's what's so incredible is when you play as all of the factions. Like I love Delhi. I like that the scholar is like the epicenter of what makes that faction unique. But you see it reflected in their landmarks, right? Like they obviously have a landmark where their military units can build stone walls, and that's almost a reflection of like you can see how that is linked, because obviously if you're focusing on education, you're focusing on technology, you would naturally train everyone that people would learn that this is how you build a stone wall. And then if you go into the military, you would still retain that knowledge. And you can see that with like France and chivalry and knights. And I think it's an incredible feat. And I think when you look at it compared to Age 2, probably my biggest gripe with Age 2 is despite there being 30 odd factions, the differences between those factions are actually very small. Like they can have quite a big impact, but you don't always feel like you just feel like sometimes there are additional factions for the sake of additional factions. Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you, like, was there like a feature or a design decision which was completely crazy, either in Age or Company of Heroes? Well, I mean, what's the craziest feature or something that someone's come to you with or you've wanted to implement, which has just been like, shot down immediately?
Oh boy, that's a tough one to answer, because there are features that seem crazy and you shut them down immediately, and then there are features that seem completely sane that proved to be utterly unworkable and just garbage. And so you invest a ton of time in them because on paper it's like, that looks really good. Okay, that's fine. We'll get art involved in engineering. We'll build some of the systems and we'll get this, we'll get an effect, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're like, that's terrible.
Yes.
I think of like on Company Heroes, reading about I don't know if it was in something I read about the Battle of the Bulge or whatever, but they were using the bulldozer Shermans to build roadblocks, block off we're pushing down trees and things around roadblocks. So like, okay, we'll do this bulldozer Sherman. You can push off cover and block. And it was a big investment and nobody uses it. It was just,
I've used it.
People have used it. Yeah, sure. But it's like,
it's not useful, but I've used it.
It's not useful. Exactly. It's like, we didn't build it kind of holistically. And this is certainly a failing on my part where like we didn't even really work it into the campaign in terms of using it to do useful things in the campaign and giving it a role. I think one of my design ethos is around sort of holistic design. The experience should be all encompassing. For as much as you can, that design should be supported by audio and effects and sound and, unique gameplay systems and tuning, and just that this feature should feel like it's a significant part of the game, that it's foundational, that you're supporting it. You can't imagine it not being there. And, something like the bulldozer wasn't really a holistic feature. It wasn't used. It wasn't portrayed everywhere. It wasn't used everywhere. It didn't have a significant use. It took a lot of time. It was slow for players. There's a bunch of things that just didn't really work out with that one. Whereas you look at something like directional cover in Company Heroes is absolutely foundational to the whole experience. And you if you take it out, you don't have Company Heroes. If you take out a bulldozer, who gives a crap,
Yeah.
So that's kind of the example. We, like I said earlier on Age, we tried a bunch of stuff that I think was really cool and would have been really, really cool in any other game, but not in Age. It detracted from the Age experience. And all of a sudden you're playing something that's like, well, this feels like a really cool version of Civ, which I guess ultimately Age, the first Age was based on, but it didn't feel like an Age of Empires experience. It didn't, so we had invested a ton of time and energy in some features early, around adjacency and even some hex systems, and they just didn't work out. They just didn't feel right. So, we chased that rabbit hole for a long time, and you invest and you're like, okay, we're just one more milestone away from making this work. And then, ultimately it just doesn't seem like it's going to get there. So, and then you're like, does it feel Age? It's like, that's the fundamental question. Does it feel like Age? And so we cut things that we probably spent a lot of money and a lot of time on,
Talking about your design process, and obviously you've spoken about it in like segments throughout the interview. Do you have a specific design process that you go through though with like every project or every feature? What is that process?
We've refined it a bit over time. I say we because there are always lots of people involved in helping to shape a game. There are some things that I do specifically for sure, and there are things that are part of my aesthetic and part of my interests that I almost always fall back on. But I think over time, working to build a way of starting and presenting a game, starting and presenting new IP, and I feel I got to a point where I feel a lot more comfortable in how that's and how I do that. And it's working out, a game vision and supporting features. These are rarely about gameplay specifically. These are about emotion and engagement and experience and the kind of what we hope that the player takes out of the game from an emotional standpoint. It's not about mechanics at that point. So that top level is about, what is the vision that we're trying to get across? On an Age of Empires, one of the things we wanted to talk about was that past is prologue, and that's Shakespeare. But that the past is never really the past, and everything that has happened in the past is just a lead up to what we're experiencing now. We wanted to get that arc to connect past and present, and the campaign is very much about that, especially. Even the civilization design, what made these civilizations unique and what kind of impact do they still have? We wanted to choose for our initial batch civilizations that had sort of stood the test of time. And that's why we have England. It's identifiable today. Why we have the Rus, and they're identifiable today as Russia. And we could trace their arc from beginning to end. The campaign is very much about this. And so that's maybe about some of how our civilization design focused on that. Can we present a continuity so we can show players the things that happened 800 years ago are not that far removed from things we experience today, that they've shaped what we experience today. And that was kind of like, is that something that players can take out of this experience as a vision? And then the sort of supporting features, in Company Heroes, it would be that sort of part of it would be that every battle tells a story idea. That's experience again. But below that, you have systems and features. How do we make every game feel unique and different? It's like, well, maybe we use random numbers a little bit more. Maybe things like positioning and a destructible environment feeds into that. Because now I have a narrative experience when this piece of cover blows up and I got to withdraw my squad. That's a little bit of a story. That's something you're going to remember. Mm-hmm. Maybe a grenade goes off in the midst of the squad and nothing happens. and that is literally, that comes out of that research, right? You read, Stephen Ambrose or Anthony Beaver or any of these authors that do more of a layman's delivery of history. They're great at connecting big events and small stories. And it's like, every once in a while, a grenade would land amongst a group of GIs and it would blow up, and like everybody's like, patting themselves and like nobody's hurt. But that's kind of a structure, and sort of long-winded, but like vision, supporting features around emotion and experience, and then how do we deliver on that with systems? Builds a pyramid from top down to, and then those systems break down into programming time and art support, and you can kind of build the game on paper that way. How do we support the vision? How do we support the features? And then how do those support the kind of the vision? And so that's part of that ethos. And I always go back to research. Can I find examples of this thing happening? Can we put context around a feature and de-abstract some features? We had the UK forces could blind a tank with their Bren guns, shoot the vision blocks. Because that was the thing. Like, tanks have glass vision blocks and they could be shot out and they would temporarily blind the crew, and they had to literally pull the vision block out and put a new glass vision block in. But the Bren was so accurate. There's stories of being able to cut the tops off of trees to get snipers out of their nests, and being able to shoot out the vision block on a tank. It's like, well, there's some context. Now we can build a system around that.
Yeah.
We've got quote proof.
Yeah.
These things happened in real life. So let's work it into a game. So anyway, that's
I think it's brilliant.
But that's often the way I think.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic to hear, like, that emotion part as well, like, creating that experience. I think, like, with your Bren example, it empowers the player, because if they put it off, they see a reaction to their action. I think, take the sniper in Company of Heroes, like, say you get to level 2, maybe you keep your sniper alive. I believe it's the Russian. Is it the Russian or the American sniper who gets the flare? They fire the flare up. The flare gives you vision, which means that then your troops can advance. And elements like that, you feel like you've earned that. With Age and Company of Heroes, they're incredibly different RTSs. And like speaking to you now, I can obviously hear the love for both of them. But Age is built more on static systems. Like the rock, paper, scissors it's always been part of the foundation that makes Age, right? And we see that even when you get an upgrade in Age, it's got the traditional old school, 25-year proven +1/+1, like +1 damage, +1 armor. Whereas in Company of Heroes, you've got far greater variables at play, because we don't have this linear system in place to the same extent. Which one do you prefer?
Yeah. I think they're definitely very different experiences. And we go back to that tactical layer. Age, you're upgrading everything. You're upgrading a whole unit class, or you're upgrading a whole weapon class, or whatever it is, because that's the level you need to think about in that game, because there's so much other stuff. In Company Heroes, individual upgrades often on individual squads is about that, maintaining value and keeping your squads alive, and the survivability and investment. And that's very much around the vision of Company Heroes. You can't just waste guys, right? You want to keep them. You want to keep them alive and keep them supported. And so they have, those systems have completely different objectives. A lot of stuff in Company Heroes is kind of modal, right? It's like, I'm going to do this thing to that unit. I'm going to pick an ability and target something. But we don't have a lot of that in Age, again, because of the scale that you play at, and the whole economy and other things on there. And so it's not so much a preference. They do very, very different things, even though they're both upgrades, but they're intended to have very different effects. I mean, I love the tactical play in Company Heroes, and I am not great at the game. I decided early, especially once it went live. I was good at the game, and then it goes live. I just needed to win a few of those engagements and win a few battles, and that would satisfy me, because at some point a better player is going to come and completely wreck my stuff.
People are so good.
I know. And developers, I'm sure you've heard this before, we are the best players in the world at our game for about 2 hours. Once it goes live, you're like, what the heck? Who is this guy? He's like, been playing the game for 2 hours, and I've got like 6,000 hours in this thing, and I'm just getting mopped.
I don't know, like just the way these guys, there's such a process to everything, and I find like I'm a very reactionary player, and I struggle. Yeah. I tell you what I would have loved, I know this would have been so hard to do, but with Company of Heroes, for me, I love that essence of keeping a squad alive. You run over a mine, or you, like you said, you get hit by a grenade, and there's one guy who manages to sprint across the entire battlefield, and then obviously you keep him alive, and he slowly levels up, and there's this real attachment there. And I think that is probably the hardest element I have with Age, is I don't feel attached to my units. I feel attached to the Civ, which is great. Like, there's that bond there, but with the units specifically, I love the games like Darkest Dungeon, like, people like the Paladin, like, alive to the end, or the Houndmaster alive to the end. Like, there's a real sense of emotion invested into that.
Yeah.
But I guess
I love the psychological component, that the sort of PTSD layer, I guess you want to describe it in that game. Just it's brilliant. Yeah.
But anyway, let's talk about where RTS is going, right? Because it is in the midst of a renaissance, you could say, with Age, Company Heroes 3, Warhammer 3 is about to come out. We're seeing the indie scene start to embrace RTS in especially in the survival format. Do you think this is a turning point for RTS, or do you think we've already seen the pinnacle of the genre? And not to confine the genre, obviously, because for me, I just hope it continues to grow, because I'm a massive fan of strategy. But sometimes it feels like, like MOBAs in some ways have replaced that competitiveness for a much bigger scale. And if you can't reach that huge scale, do you think publishers are going to start to think, well, and I love that Microsoft have supported this project, but Age is such a big franchise. Company Heroes, they're such big franchises. Where's it going to go? Is RTS going to, where is it going to go?
Oh, yeah, it's a tough question. Is this history repeating itself? And I if I think back, some of my perspective on the previous rise and fall of RTS was that it got crowded, people sort of chasing the genre, and these are hard games to make. And they take time and investment, and a lot of people aren't always willing to put in that time and investment. And I think back to the the early noughties, to use your term again, how many RTS clones were there, and how many were just junk, just they weren't good. And I think there were a lot of people that got into playing the genre that maybe started with something that was not a particularly good game, a clone of a clone, and turn them off. And I think you see, maybe also the emergence of technology back then, that people wanted a more immersive experience, and RTSs aren't always that. The camera necessitates a certain distance, literally, emotionally, and physically, from the battlefield. And I think with some of the big shooters and other games that came on, they were just so amazing looking and immersive, and I think people moved into some of that as well, not just into MOBAs, but into other genres. So I don't know. I think the thing that kind of gives me a little bit of hope for the reemergence of the genre is, I'm going to sound like a real capitalist here, but it's investment in new startups. That venture capitalists, they understand risk, they understand, maybe the emergence of, something new, and I'm putting air quotes on that. So you see investment from big companies and venture capitalists and funds in companies like Frost Giant, and I don't know, there's 2 or 3 others that Tencent is invested in, for instance, in ex-Blizzard developers and others. So they're like, they might see something. They might be projecting something. And then sometimes you got to look at that, and it's like, okay, what do they see that others aren't? So they see the potential to make money. These might be more streamlined games. They might be solely competitive. They may not. Maybe they don't do a campaign because all that stuff's expensive. But there's something there, and I think there's a desire maybe for a real, some real depth and a different kind of depth. Like League of Legends, I don't know, they've got 90 heroes or whatever it is. So there's a lot of depth in the game, but maybe it's a different kind of depth that players are looking for. And Age is a very dynamic experience, random maps and other things that gives players an attempt to use skills in a different way.
I love that.
And so, yeah, we had this kind of, we talked to Microsoft. They one of their pillars for Age was random maps, and for us that was a feature. So like, okay, how do we adapt that? Play forever, because be able to play forever, because it's always going to be a little bit different. So yeah, I like to think that there's an emergence. I think we might see a more streamlined version of RTSs, maybe more competitive focused, kind of in that League of Legends kind of vein. I think Frost Giant, for instance, is using Unreal. So they might be dealing with a smaller character count, or unless they're building some simulation. I don't know. I'm not engaged with them, but that leads me to believe that maybe it's a smaller character count, slightly more focused experience. But that's just me reading some tea leaves. I think there are very few companies right now that can do big RTSs the way, say, Relic can, or Blackbird, or Creative Assembly. They're big and they're hard. They take a long time to come to fruition. Like you build an action platformer, and you can do a 2-minute level and go, okay, this is kind of what the game feels like. People are like, oh, I get it. We were always told to do a vertical slice of RTS. It's like, okay, well, vertical slice of RTS is the whole army and AI and all the maps and all the game systems, and it's like, it's hard to get going. It's hard to build and start an RTS because there's so much that's required just to start playing.
That's what makes them so brilliant, right? Is it's this, and we have this, like when I lose to my mates or beat my mates, there's no greater competitive feeling, because you've just spent anywhere from 10 to 40 minutes like trying to outthink someone but react quicker than them. Like, and I think often, like I love FPS. I love I used to be a massive fan of Modern Warfare. I loved being really good at that, but I still think the feeling you get beating people at an RTS, it's like, it goes back to that raw, like I used to be in chess club at school, like, and like this, like real, like raw, like outthinking someone. I find far more, maybe it's because I'm getting older, and I can't outreact people now, but it's far more gratifying than having quicker reactions, because so much more goes into that. Like, not only do you have to visualize what you're going to do and strategize, but then you have to act and react to how they've reacted to your proaction. And I think that's why, for me, like personally, like only a strategy really embodies that. Other games can do it, like you see with games like Hearthstone, and like we were speaking at the beginning of the episode, there are strategic elements in so many genres now. I've got to ask, like, considering how you are almost like synonymous with RTS night design and how they've grown, and this, you can see it from Homeworld to Company of Heroes to Company of Heroes 2, Impossible Creatures, Age of Empires 4. This is a great spectrum of what RTSs are. Do you ever feel like an actual responsibility for how the genre performs?
Not until you said that, maybe. No, I think, I've had an opportunity to work on some amazing franchises, and I felt very responsible for how those ones performed. Like, I love the genre, and I would love to see it regain some prominence. It's a niche, right? The strategy games are a niche, and I think they'll remain a niche. I think they'll be a big niche, maybe bigger than they are now, and there'll be more players, and there'll be more interesting competition, and more choices for players who love the games. I don't know. There's probably a lot of players, maybe like you or I, who are a bit less competitive than we used to be, and are a bit slower than we used to be, and maybe don't have as much time as we used to. And there's some things that can be very fulfilling about playing strategy games, and learning something and earning something. Maybe it is that investment of spending a half hour, an hour in a game and a bit more long form content. I don't know if I feel, I don't know if I feel a responsibility for the genre, but I certainly would love to see it grow and, maybe evolve in some other ways and draw people in. And maybe draw in the kinds of players that feel less comfortable in other games as well. I'm not quite as comfortable playing shooters as I used to. There's a pace. There's maybe a culture to them. There's a ruthlessness that's a bit off-putting somehow. There's rampant cheating. I mean, the last big shooter I played, I think maybe Battlefield 5, and just starting a level and just somebody's hacking stuff. It's like, oh God, it's just, I can't, not to say it doesn't occur in other things, but the RTS audience can be a little more community feel, I think. Maybe it's, it's just a little smaller, a little more intimate. There's an idea that we all love something that's a little bit kind of niche and slightly weird. And so maybe there's a camaraderie there. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I love it. Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see it stick around and get stronger for sure. So
yeah. I think it will, and it's got a fantastic community. I feel, on your FPS analogy, I feel, I struggle with something like Fortnite because I find it weird that if I start shooting at someone, they all of a sudden throw up a 4-bedroom house, and I'm just my brain just doesn't understand that, but that's a big part of how this guy's got a bungalow in a Winnebago, and I'm I'm like, dude, I don't know what you want me to do.
I see my son play that, and it's just this 60-story build, teetering House of Cards towers of, it's I know there's some backstory there that I haven't spent the time to understand. I mean, you think sort of culturally, it allows people to really express themselves. There's some interesting strategy. There's no context to anything that's in that world. It's just seems to be sort of no rules. Maybe kids, like that kind of thing. It seems to be their domain of kind of 12-year-olds. I don't, I'm not sure exactly what the full demographic is, but I know I have trouble relating.
I think they fill in the blanks. Maybe I think there's it's a lot about perception, isn't it? You've got Deadpool fighting Ariana Grande, or I haven't got a clue, right? I'm just, but I think it's an age thing as well. I think you're right. I missed that.
Yeah, it might be empowering for kids. They, I don't know. They don't always get to make the decisions, right? But this, in a game like that, they can, and maybe there's some empowerment there that's psychologically fulfilling. For 12 to 15-year-olds, or whatever their group is. So.
I don't know. They're going to be fantastic architects, though. But
exactly. Skylines of the future, just 60 stories of wooden pallets.
It's physics defying buildings. I've got to ask, right? Because obviously, we've spoken a lot about Relic, and obviously, your fantastic contribution, not only to the genre, and obviously all the player communities that play your RTS titles, but also to Relic itself. You obviously recently left. What happened?
I've been there almost 24 years, and that's obviously a long time. It's kind of half my lifetime. I felt like I kind of needed a bit of a creative change. Just I wanted to try something a little bit different, maybe in a slightly different environment. You get to the point where you start to feel kind of moss covered, and like in Pirates of the Caribbean, where they, I think it was the first one, the pirate ship and the old pirates down in the hold who are sort of grown into be part of the ship, and they're covered. I was starting to feel, I don't know, maybe a little bit like furniture. I just needed a little bit of a change, a little spark. I've got a few games left in me and a few years left in me, and it just felt like it was, after shipping age, felt like it was just time for a change. And there's no, I think I could have been happy at Relic, but I was chasing kind of a level of internal satisfaction. I wasn't sure I was gonna get there. As much as I love the studio and everybody there, this was me being a bit a bit selfish. I needed to, I needed to kind of look after my own creative needs and try something a bit different. To take that experience I have and it's like, can I make it work elsewhere, or is this only something that would work at Relic? That's kind of something I'm really interested to test out.
So. Oh, that's really fascinating. I think it's fantastic you're doing it. Like, when obviously anyone I work with, even if they report into me, like when they're talking about doing other things and they don't feel like they can fulfill them within the company that we work for, or have worked for in the past, always encourage them, like, you've got to, if you don't see what it looks like over the fence, then you'll always regret not looking, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and sometimes you have to make a commitment. Can you talk about what's next for you? Like, not like, obviously nothing game specific, but what does, what's an idyllic forecast for you over the next 3 years?
Yeah, I am, going to continue in a game director role, maybe working on something new. It's, we're going to kind of figure that out I guess by the time this goes out, I'll be working at Blackbird. And so these are a lot of people who I worked with in this foundational days at Relic that, I worked with on Homeworld, and even a couple of people that I worked with at Virtual Games, before.
Oh, that's great.
So they're, I've got some old friends, and I'm kind of looking forward to reacquainting myself with them and with maybe a different creative ethos and just a different energy, and we'll sort of see what happens. I would love to be working in something that is ultimately a strategy game that doesn't feel like a strategy game. That could kind of shock people into understanding that they're playing a strategy game. Strategy adjacent, but using a lot of the ideas and processes that I feel I've worked on over the years. So that's the next few years. I'd love to build a new game that that people maybe don't realize is a strategy game. A gateway drug to strategy, kind of sneak them into it. So I think I'd love to pursue some of those kind of ideas.
I think that's really cool. I think that's it sounds hard to do. Like, it is hard because obviously strategy is innately challenging to get into, isn't it? Right? Like it just is. Like, we talk about the complexity of RTS and age and how hard that is for a new player. Like, I've played a lot of RTS and I find age incredibly hard, and because the systems are so granular eventually that you're like looking at villager count and you're like, you have to have a specific number of villagers like on lumber, and if you forget to do that, right, and you're going for a big artillery push like towards the big siege push, and you haven't had enough people on lumber, then like everything falls apart. And you can wait, I think it's fascinating to see how that works out. And I think it's brilliant. And obviously, like Blackbird, I think that's, fantastic. I love that you're going to be working with some of the guys from Virtual. I love that, like, how it's come full circle. I think it's brilliant. Yeah. I guess on the final note then, like, what I'd love, if you can do, and I've asked all our guests from season 2, I say, well, I guess most our guests in season 2 to do is like summarize their career thus far in one sentence. To give you an example, Lorne Lanning, the guy who founded Oddworld Inhabitants, he summarized his by saying brutally enlightening. So, but yeah, if you could encapsulate it in one sentence, what would it say?
Oh boy. I mean, I think in many ways the key to longevity is managing your mistake to success ratio on a day-to-day basis. So, over and above everything, it's like, have I made slightly fewer mistakes today than I've had successes? Or, am I below 5 to 1? I think that's partially it. I think over time you get better at recognizing mistakes maybe before you make them. You'll always make them. I think that's maybe part of managing key day to day. And I think other things is I've always worked with great people, great teams. What's that phrase? Like, you want to travel fast, go alone. You want to travel far, go together.
Oh, I love that.
I think that's that might sum up the career. It's nothing about the creative or the titles, but just that to be around a long time, you gotta work together.
That's brilliant. Love that, Quinn. Oh, mate, on that note, like, it's been such a pleasure. Like, it's been an incredible. I can't believe we've obviously been chatting for 2 hours nearly. It's been incredibly insightful, like incredibly like warming as well, right? Like, there's a
Oh, thanks.
yeah, it's been fantastic. I like to just thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been fantastic, Luke. I really enjoyed it. I really appreciate the time and attention and some great insightful questions. So it was fantastic. Really had a great time. If you ever have somebody that quits on you last moment or whatever, just give me a call.
I will do. I'll be like, how's it going with that strategy game where you don't know you're playing a strategy game in your life?
Hey, might have to touch base in the future. You never know.
Yeah, we have to. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, God, yeah. Obviously, just a quick disclaimer. Obviously, the opinions that you've heard today are those of Quinn's and my own, and do not represent our employers. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can. I did take a moment. If you would like to reach out to us, you can at gamedevshow@ptw.com. Quinn, hopefully we'll speak soon. Everyone else, thank you so much for listening in. And till next time.
Game over.